Right now, people are making some major life sacrifices to become homeowners and to maintain being a homeowner. And when I read some of this stuff, I really just have to sit there and question if it's even worth it. And of course, it's really up to the individual who's doing these things to decide if it's worth it for them or their family. But some of the stuff that people are doing is just kind of insane, guys. Like, for example, people who are divorced are continuing to live together or even moving back in with their exes in order to just be able to afford the house. I mean, that's what this is coming down to these days. According to a recent Redfin survey, about 44% of US homeowners and renters are now struggling to afford their regular rent or mortgage payments. So Redfin asked these people who are homeowners and renters who are struggling with payments, which sacrifices or changes they are making to their lives in order to afford the cost of housing. And some of them are low stakes, like, okay, we're not eating out, we're not going on vacation, but other things are more major impacts on your entire life trajectory, like we're choosing not to get married, we're choosing not to have kids, we're putting off a divorce. You know, you don't hear that one too often. At the end of the day, people need a place to live, and you might look across the room and realize you need that person that you think you hate more than you realize. About 6.4% of people who answered this Redfin survey said they are moving in with their parents to afford housing. 5.7% are moving in with roommates, and 2.8% are moving in with their own children, presumably older people with kids who are already living in and owning their own house. 5.3% of people are moving in with a romantic partner in order to afford their housing payment. And on the flip side, 2.8% are postponing getting a divorce or separation because they are unable to afford housing on their own. 4% of people are giving up on having kids to afford a house. 4.4% are giving up saving college tuition for their children. And 3% of parents enrolled their kids in a lower rated school in order to afford the mortgage. Even 4.6% of people are giving up their pets in order to afford housing right now. And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who are going to say in the comments, I would rather give up my wife or my husband or my kids before I give up my pets. And here's the curious thing. We keep being told how incomes are still surpassing the rate of inflation, right? Well, if that's true, why is everybody having such a hard time keeping up with their housing or rent payment? Especially when the inflation data is based on what homeowners think they can rent their home for, and rent prices in particular have been going down in many parts of the country. So what gives? Maybe it's because the inflation data that we all look at and are supposed to rely on isn't actually accurate. Maybe that could be it. Also, there's a lot more to affording a home, especially when you're a home owner, which I'm planning on doing a full video on real soon, because it's almost like buying the house is the easy part these days. That's going to be the title of the video. So be on the lookout for that, because, you know, as hard as it is to buy a house, it's almost the easy part now, with all the other things and expenses you have to worry about after you become a homeowner. And for renters, even though all you have to pay is your monthly rent payment, a lot of renters either typically make less than homeowners do, or they actually have more irresponsible spending habits. Of course, sometimes it is a lifestyle choice, and people can actually save a significant amount of money renting and invest the difference that they would be spending on a house into other investments and obtain wealth that way, and there's nothing wrong with that either. But the reality is that homes are so expensive, whether you are renting or are an owner, that you pretty much need two incomes these days to afford to live somewhere. And most people who buy homes buy a home with their partner, and they use both of their incomes to qualify for a loan. And this is a huge mistake, because if you ever get divorced or separated or whatever, or one of you dies, God forbid, things happen, right? Then if you need both incomes to afford that house, well, now all of a sudden you can't afford that house any longer. So it really makes more sense to buy a home based on one person's qualified income. And I know this might sound impossible, but guess what? People I know who I grew up with in the Midwest have done this. My best friend Dan did this, and my sister and her husband did this with their house as well. So it is possible, probably only in the Midwest, that's my guess, based on where home prices are at these days, but it can be done. In more expensive areas like here in California and Florida, I doubt most people are going to be able to pull that off, but it should be something to strive for. Some people even resort to co-owning a home with roommates or friends in order to make it work. And to that I say, I hope you trust your friends, and I hope everything is in writing, and I hope you have legal documents spelling out what happens if X, Y, or Z goes wrong, so that way everybody knows and has clear expectations of what might happen if one person wants out or 2 out of the 5 people living in the house can't pay the bills anymore. Some of the other things that people are doing to afford their house payment right now are working additional hours at work or picking up extra shifts, borrowing money from friends or family that they claim they will pay back. Watch out for that one. Selling some belongings, getting gift funds from friends or family that's not expected to be paid back, skipping meals altogether, working an extra job, not just extra hours, delaying or skipping healthcare or medical treatments to pay the bills, working a side hustle such as Uber or food delivery, dipping into retirement savings, sleeping in a homeless shelter. You get the idea. And the other ones we already went over. It's not pretty. And you know, the housing market is in a pretty bad spot right now, and it's leading a lot of people to becoming landlords who cannot sell their house. You know, we've seen a lot of delistings happen on the housing market recently because sellers are just not getting the price that they're expecting. And instead, a lot of them are deciding to turn their house into a rental, which is also going to help bring down the cost of not only rent, but also the price of homes, because with more rentals available, that helps increase competition and lowers rent prices and ultimately lowers housing costs for people, because why would a renter choose to buy your house for $2,500 a month when they can go and rent that same house for $1,500 a month, you know? But take a look at this. There's been a rise of a lot of accidental landlords who are finding themselves in this situation. Rent prices in the top 20 U.S. markets for single-family homes are expected to rise by only 0.8% this year, according to John Burns Research and Consulting, and that will be the slowest pace of rent growth for single-family since 2011. And back then, we had major job losses, much worse than now, and already we're seeing levels like that. Take a look at this chart here of the rent growth of single-family homes going all the way back to 1985. You can see the historical average, things were pretty flat, you know, around 2 to 4% per year, around 3%, kind of tracking inflation up until right before the pandemic, and it started to skyrocket, but now it is coming crashing back down to almost flat rent growth. And a lot of these big Wall Street investment firms who bought up thousands of single-family rentals didn't anticipate this. And this is how we're leading to a situation where so many new rentals are hitting the market. At the beginning of this summer, there were 3 million homes listed, but only 28% of them actually sold. That left almost 2 million houses still on the market, up 20% year over year. Then, of course, sellers have had to cut prices if they really want to sell. Others just take it off the market and hope for better luck next year.
Hey, Coach, what's going on here, man? What about me?
Gilmore, I called your number, didn't I?
No, you didn't.
Oh, well, better luck next year.
But 2.3% of for-sale homes actually converted to rentals. That's roughly an additional 45,000 single-family homes for rent. And I forgot to tell you guys, I'm walking down Peacock Drive and now Lagoon Drive here in San Rafael, California. Now this is leading to companies like Invitation Homes reporting falling rents for new leases in some of their oversupplied markets like Tampa, Orlando, Jacksonville, and Dallas. And not to mention the inventory for sale in Dallas and Tampa is up 25% and 39% respectively compared to 2019. These markets are now oversupplied past what it was before the pandemic. And you need to watch out for some sneaky landlord tricks if you're a renter right now, because what a lot of these landlords are doing to offset declining rents is they are actually trying to increase rents for people who have been tenants for a long time. So say you've lived in the place for 2 or 3 years, they are actually trying to increase your rent on average 6%, and at the same time only increasing the rent on new leases by 0.2%, which means essentially no increase, just a flat number. So your neighbor who just moved in could potentially be paying less than you who've been a loyal tenant for the past 5 years. Something you got to watch out for. Don't be afraid to move if your landlord is trying to strong arm you into paying more than you should be, and you know for a fact that other tenants in your area or neighborhood or building or whatever are paying less than you. And this decline in rents has been actually making a big impact on these big Wall Street investors. Single-family rental company stocks are underperforming the S&P 500. They're also underperforming apartment landlords and home builders. And think about this, there are a record number of renters in the United States right now. Landlords are still facing an oversupply and weakening demand due to just how many rentals are available out there right now. That's why I keep telling people this is a very good time to be a renter. We just talked about all the sacrifices people have to make to be able to afford their house payment. Sometimes that means rent, but a lot of it is your mortgage. And one way you can easily decrease your house payment in many cases right now is by choosing to rent versus own. And I'm not saying that no one should ever buy a house or own one, but now it's just a more favorable time to be a tenant versus a landlord. That's what the facts tell us, guys. Rent is about 50% cheaper than being a homeowner in most major areas across the country. And in some cases, extreme examples of like where I'm at here, it can be 100%, 200% cheaper to be a renter versus an owner. But not all landlords are greedy in trying to increase their bottom line. In fact, there is a story out of Florida of a couple who owns 28 rental units, and they rent all of their units at or below market rates to attract as many applicants as possible, reduce tenant turnover, and keep tenants satisfied. And I actually love this. This is so wonderful to hear that there are still some landlords out there like this. And notice, this is not your big Wall Street investor landlord. These are mom and pop landlords. 28 units is a lot for mom and pop, but it's still nothing compared to Invitation Homes, for example. And even though they charge under market rent, they earn 6 figures in mostly passive rental income, only spending 10 hours a month managing properties. Usually if they do raise the rent, they only raise it at 5% per year, and it's usually due to higher insurance costs, especially being in Florida. But they cap it at 5%. They won't raise anybody's rent more than 5% a year, even though there's no restriction against doing that in Florida. And they're really smart because they're fighting back against this situation, because in oversupplied markets, especially in some Florida markets, they avoid raising rents because the supply already outweighs the demand there. So if you want to stay competitive as a landlord and keep the cash flow coming in, the best thing you can do is to keep your tenants and not abuse them like these corporate landlords and continue raising their rents while offering the new people the discount. That's just like what the cable and the phone companies and the satellite companies have always done. I hated that, you know? You see all these promotions that these cell phone companies do and cable TV, and they give you the best deal, but for new customers only, right? Well, what about your old loyal customers who've been with you for the past 5 to 10 years? These guys are just chopped liver, right? They don't matter. We can just increase them until they drop off, until they just cancel their subscription. I mean, that's how these companies treat people, and I think they all deserve to go under. These landlords actually even share their expenses on the property with their tenants so they can see if they raise the rent that it is in fact justified. And for example, when they bought a duplex, the inherited tenants were paying $1,100 per month, but the market rent was $1,600 a month. So they sat down with them and came up with, a fair deal that everybody was happy with, and they agreed on increasing the rent by $300 a month, which still puts them at $1,400, well below the market value of $1,600. And I think these people are not only super kind and doing the world some good, which we all could use right now, but also they are actually making very good money doing it, and probably even better money than these corporate landlords because they're able to retain their tenants. And without turnover and vacancies, which typically are some of landlords' biggest expense besides mortgage, taxes, and insurance, well, they're saving that money every year because they are retaining their tenants. And let's face it, happy tenants typically don't trash the place and they don't move. So keeping the rents slightly under market value makes their business more stable, more profitable, and more predictable over the long term. So I just thought I wanted to share that with you guys to let you know that there are still some landlords out there like this, even though they are becoming rarer and fewer and far between. My wife and I were landlords like that until we got out of the game last year. Here's a story that was sent to me by Steve out of New York City, where the New York City Council just passed a new law regarding the installation of appliances, and they think that this is going to cause rent prices in New York to go up even higher than they already are now. Here's what they're doing. This new law requires New Yorkers to hire master plumbers or specially qualified handyman to handle putting in gas ovens, dryers, and other appliances. And it's being said that this cost is going to be directly passed on to the tenants who live in these units. And now these installations are going to cost as much as $500 or more per installation. And the landlords are not going to be absorbing this cost, and they're going to be passing this along to tenants most likely. And apparently they're doing this because there was an explosion that killed 2 people and brought down 3 buildings, which was all caused by an illegal gas hookup. But then, they go too far, right? They make these new laws and make it so that everything costs a fortune and ultimately ends up hurting everybody, whereas they could just have an inspection done, use some of those New York City tax dollars, right, and have their city inspectors go out and make sure the job was done right, rather than charge everybody a fortune for this. And one thing I haven't talked about in a while is commercial real estate. Here in San Francisco, one of their biggest landlords ever, Veritas, is defaulting on $652 million in loans, and 66 buildings are going to be up for grabs because of this major default. These are 66 apartment buildings with nearly 1,600 units belonging to Veritas. And there's been so many commercial defaults like this in the Bay Area. In fact, the apartment complex that I'm staying here was actually affected by a similar default where the landlord filed for bankruptcy earlier this year, and now the apartment complex is in receivership. And Veritas is a company that took out a $3.6 million PPP loan in 2020, despite being a $3 billion company. But karma and greed catches up with everybody, because as of 2025, they have now defaulted on nearly $1 billion in loans on their San Francisco properties. In 2024 alone, they had to sell off 23 of their buildings, which made them no longer San Francisco's largest landlord. And now this year, it looks like they're going to be having to get rid of an additional 66 buildings. And the thing is, it's not like, all these tenants go homeless, guys, because since I just went through this here with the apartment building that I'm living in, nothing really changes for the tenants except for who you're paying the rent to. That's all that really changes. They send you a letter and they say, hey, we were charging you rent from this company, and now your new rent payments are going to be due to this company. Here's all the new contact information from them, etc. Have a nice day. That's pretty much all they do. Unless, of course, the new owner decides to renovate the property or to sell them to somebody else who wants to renovate or increase the rent significantly, then this can have a major impact on the tenants living in the building. So Veritas has only until December 17th to get all of their loans in good standing. Otherwise, all these places are going to be auctioned off in foreclosure. And the reason I wanted to mention that is because that just shows you that being a landlord these days is not nearly as profitable as it once used to be. It's no longer profitable for me. That's why I got out. I mean, depending on how long ago you bought properties, it can still be profitable because you lock in lower property taxes, you lock in a lower cost you paid for the property, different things like that. But if you're trying to get in the landlord business today and make a solid profit, good luck. And unfortunately, a lot of these people who can't sell their house for the top dollar that they thought it was worth are also in a situation where they're not going to be able to make a profit being a landlord, and they're going to have to find that out the hard way as well. So let us know in the comments if you or someone else you know are making some major sacrifices to pay their mortgage or rent payments right now, and what those sacrifices are. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check out this one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.